Welcome to DDL, where we discuss everyday topics like current events and/or controversial points of view. This is Noel. I'm Void. First things first, shout out to our sponsor, Candle Time. Head over to the link in the description to purchase a candle today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So let's dive into tariffs. Tariffs are a big topic of conversation because of Trump's actions and some of the fear mongering going on by the political elites, and people don't fully understand what tariffs actually are. It was interesting. I had a great conversation with a guy that I know who might be joining periodically to have conversations. I ended up having a great conversation with him, ranging from tariffs, the political stuff going on in the U.S., religion, start talking about deep space and interdimensions and fourth dimensional beings, fifth dimensional beings, all the way up to 11th dimensional beings. It's really good, interesting conversations. But one point that he asked me was on the tariffs. He wanted a better understanding on tariffs. So I figured let's do a show on tariffs. What are they? So let's go ahead and swap over to the screen and shabam. Tariff. I'm going to use Wikipedia and then I'm going to use a different source. I haven't read through these. We're going to read through these together. So let's see. It says a tariff is a tax imposed by the government of a country or customs territory or by a supranational union on imports or exceptionally exports of goods. Besides being a source of revenue, import duties can also be a form of regulation of foreign trade and policy that taxes foreign products to encourage or safeguard domestic industry. Protective tariffs are among the most widely used instruments of protectionism, along with import quotas and export quotas and other non-tariff barriers to trade. Tariffs can be a fixed, constant sum per unit of imported goods or a percentage of the price, or variable. The amount varies according to the price. Interesting. Tariffs on imports are designed to raise the price of imported goods and services to discourage consumption. The intention is for the citizens to buy local products instead, thereby stimulating their country's economy. Tariffs therefore provide an incentive to develop production and replace imports with domestic products. Tariffs are meant to reduce pressure from foreign competition and reduce the trade deficit. They have historically been justified as a means to protect infant industries and allow to import substitution industrialization. Tariffs may also be used to rectify artificially low prices of certain imported goods due to dumping, export subsidies, or currency manipulation. The effect is to raise the price of the goods in the destination country. There are near unanimous consensus among economists that tariffs are self-defeating and have a negative effect on economic growth and economic welfare, while free trade and the reduction of trade barriers has a positive effect on economic growth. Although trade liberalization can sometimes result in large and unequally distributed losses and gains, and can in the short run cause significant economic dislocation of workers in importing competitive sectors. Free trade has advantages of lowering costs of goods and services for both producers and consumers. The economic burden of tariffs falls on the importer, the exporter, and the consumer, often intended to protect specific industries. Tariffs can end up backfiring and harming the industries they were intended to protect through rising input costs and retaliatory tariffs. Import tariffs can also cause harm. Import tariffs can also harm domestic exporters by disrupting their supply chains and raising their input costs. So we don't need to get into that etymology, history. We don't necessarily need to get into that. We want to just to understand what a tariff is. And that's actually not a bad explanation that Wikipedia had. Interesting. I was the best on explaining things. So let's go over here to Investopedia. What is a tariff? Most countries are limited by their natural resources and ability to produce certain goods and services. They trade with other countries to get what their population needs and demands. However, trade isn't always conducted in an amendable manner between trading partners. Policies, geopolitics, competition, and many other factors can make trading partners unhappy. One of the ways governments deal with trading partners they disagree with is through tariffs. A tariff is a tax imposed by one country on the goods and services imported from another country to influence it, raise revenues, or protect competitive advantages. Key takeaways: governments impose tariffs to raise revenue, protect domestic industries, or exert political leverage over another country. Tariffs often result in unwanted side effects such as higher consumer prices. Tariffs have a long and contentious history, in the debate over whether they represent good or bad policy still rages. So understanding tariffs are used to restrict imports. Simply put, they increase the price of goods and services purchased from another country, making them less attractive to domestic customers. The key point to understand is that a tariff affects the key point to understand is that a tariff affects the exporting country because consumers in the country that imposed the tariff might shy away from imports due to the price increase. However, if the consumer still chooses the imported product, then the tariff has essentially raised the cost to the consumer in another country. There are two types of tariffs. A specific tariff is levied as a fixed fee based on the type of item, such as a $500 tariff on a car. An ad valorem tax is levied based on the item's value, such as a 5% of an import's value. So why do the governments impose tariffs? Governments may impose tariffs for several reasons: to raise revenues, to protect domestic industries, to protect the domestic consumers, to protect national interests. Raising revenues. Taxes can be used to raise revenues for governments. This kind of tariff is called a revenue tariff and is not designed to restrict imports. For instance, in 2018 and 2019, President Donald Trump and his administration imposed tariffs on many items to rebalance the trade deficit. In the fiscal year 2018, customs duties received were $41.6 billion. In fiscal year 2019, duties received were $71.9 billion. Protecting domestic industries. Governments can use tariffs to benefit particular industries, often doing so to protect companies and jobs. For example, in April of 2018, President Donald Trump imposed a 25% ad valorem tax on steel articles from all countries except Canada and Mexico. In March 2022, President Joe Biden replaced the tariff on steel products from the United Kingdom with a tariff rate quota for 500 metric tons and reached quota deals with several other countries. This proclamation reopened the trade of specific items with the UK while taking measures to protect domestic U.S. steel manufacturing production jobs. So, protecting domestic consumers by making foreign-produced goods more expensive. Tariffs can make domestically produced alternatives seem more attractive. Some products made in countries with fewer regulations can harm consumers, such as a product coated in lead-based paint. Tariffs can make these products so expensive that consumers won't buy them. Effective February 1st of 2025, President Donald Trump placed a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico and 10% tariffs on all imports from China. The rationale behind these tariffs was to force these countries to cooperate with the U.S. to stem the flow of illegal immigrants and drugs like fentanyl from entering the U.S., as well as to boost domestic manufacturing and raise revenues. So that's interesting. I actually like how they broke that one out. That was really good. Protecting national interests. Tariffs can also be used as an extension of foreign policy, as their imposition on a trading partner's main exports may be used to exert economic leverage. For example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, much of the world protested by boycotting Russian goods or imposing sanctions. In April 2022, President Joe Biden suspended normal trade with Russia. In June, he raised the tariff on Russian imports not prohibited by the April suspension to 35%. Yeah. Unintended side effects of tariffs. Tariffs can have an unaffected side effects. They can make domestic industries less efficient and innovative by reducing competition. They can hurt domestic consumers since a lack of competition tends to push up prices. They can generate tensions by favoring specific industries or geographic regions over others. For example, tariffs designed to help manufacturers in cities may hurt consumers in rural areas who do not benefit from the policy and are likely to pay more for manufactured goods. Finally, in an attempt to pressure a rival country by using tariffs can develop into an unproductive cycle of retaliation, commonly known as a trade war. So, the advantages and disadvantages of tariffs. Pros: produce revenues, open negotiations, support a nation's goals, and make a market predictable. Cons: create issues between governments and initiates trade wars. I would also throw in potentially raising prices in the domestic country. So they go on to explain. So produce revenues. Tariffs provide a government a chance to bring in more money. This can relieve some of the tax burdens felt by the country's citizens and help the government to reduce deficits. They open negotiations. They can be used by countries to open negotiations for trade or other issues. Each side can use tariffs to help them create economic policies and talk with the trade partners. It supports the nation's goals by using them to ensure domestic products receive preference within a country to support businesses and the economy. And then they also make a market more predictable. Tariffs can help stabilize a market and make prices predictable. Disadvantages. Many nations use tariffs to punish or discourage actions they disapprove of, and unfortunately doing this can create tensions between the two countries and lead to more problems. You're kind of seeing that firsthand with what's going on with Trump's new tariff stuff's happening. Or you can see that with Donald Trump's new tariffs that he's doing currently. Initiate trade wars, and this is also happening. A typical response for a country with tariffs imposed on it is to respond similarly, creating a trade war in which neither country benefits from the other. Canada went ahead and tried doing that with some of the imports from the U.S. And immediately had a turn tail on that one. So definitely is going on. What the effect is kind of unknown at this point. So we're not going to go through the history, but the bottom line, tariffs have existed in one form or another for centuries. Trading partners implement them to politically influence a partner, protect domestic industries and consumers, and further national goals and interests. Tariffs are not always negative, regardless of what you might see on the news. They can be a means to open negotiations, again, between trading partners, provide each chance to voice concerns, and even help to stabilize a country's market. And I'm glad that they put that in there the way it is, because a lot of people have negative views on tariffs. Tariffs, when done inappropriately, will have negative side effects. Plain and simple. It is going to happen. I am a fan of tariffs, which is weird for me to say because I am a very free market. I don't like government interference, but there are a few things that the government must interfere with when it comes to markets. And that is when you're living in a nation, the citizenship of the nation must override the free market enterprise of a global economy. There's a few other things. You'll never hear me say that there should be a minimum wage or anything like that. I think the government involvement in that poses a huge concern in my eyes. Tariffs do not. The other aspect that the government really needs to get involved in is the monopolies, making sure that the competition remains and we don't end up with monopolies. But those are really the only two major ones that I would say that the government has any business interfering with a free market. And that's more or less for consumer protections. Beyond that, the government shouldn't be interfering. They should not have red tape on like EPA studies or anything like that. What you're doing is artificially inflating cost of building a house, right? That's a huge one. When you artificially create a minimum wage for that, that's you're basically building in a predisposed price on a product, which is not good either. We need to let free markets handle it. And we need to have more faith that people can develop skills and negotiate on their behalf for the value that they actually can bring. So let's look at Yahoo Finance. Kind of the big updates on this one. Trump tariff live updates, what big retailers like Walmart, Costco, and Target are doing to brace for Trump's impacts or Trump's tariffs. It's frustrating because the headline is typical, which is equating it to a negative. However, the sentiment that businesses are going to have to account for what the tariffs are going to do is spot on. It's phrased in a negative manner, and it shouldn't be viewed as a negative or a positive. It should be just viewed as a factual. This is what's happening, and because of that, we're going to have to make choices down the road. So President Trump's tariffs are reshaping U.S. trade policy and overhauling decades of free trade agreements with friend and foe alike. I've never been a fan of free trade agreements because you don't really ever have a true free trade agreement. Yes, it's just like communism. In theory, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. In practice, it doesn't actually work, which is just unfortunate. So steel and aluminum, 25% U.S. tariff on imports of steel and aluminum from all countries took effect on Wednesday, March 12th. Trump threatened to raise the tariff to 50% for Canadian imports of the metals, but reconsidered after Canada suspended a new tax on U.S.-bound electricity, and the countries made plans for new trade talks. Right. So that's what I was getting at. Is Trump imposed a tariff. Canada did not like it. Went ahead and basically initiated a trade war. Okay, you're doing this. We're going to go ahead and tariff you on your electricity that you're providing us. And then Trump went ahead and just said, okay, do that, and we're going to jack it up to 50%. And Canada went ahead and did about face. But what it did is it did a positive, which brought Canada back to the table and actually said, hey, let's negotiate a better trade arrangement between the two countries, right? And the same thing is going to be going on with Mexico and stuff like that. Tariffs, in my mind, are not a bad thing, and this is one of the reasons why. Canada is a large trading partner of the United States. However, they benefit from the United States without any fees or associated with it, which isn't a bad thing per se. But when you do it for so long and you're banking on that, being nice only gets you so far. You have to have equitable agreements. And unfortunately, the U.S. government, our U.S. policies are fairly non-equitable. We're usually on the short end of the stick. Our domestic industry has tanked. We offshored most of our manufacturing to other countries, mainly because it is cheaper for us to produce it, but at the same time, and ship it back over here. But at the same time, when we do that, we give up a lot of our own internal capabilities in order to protect ourselves going forward. So, interesting. EU has the European Union has responded to those metal duties with counter tariffs on $28 billion in U.S. goods from April, bringing Trump's trade war across the Atlantic. Trump has threatened targeted tariffs on the bloc of Eastern Europe, a bloc of European countries, and has vowed to respond to those counter tariffs. Most notably, on Thursday, he threatened a 200% tariff on wine, champagnes, and alcoholic products if the EU did not remove a tariff on imported U.S. whiskey. So, this is just another example of a trade war that's going on. And a lot of this stems from, if you look at the history, I just already said it. If you look at the history of how our trade partners have taken advantage of us, they do not like the fact that we're now trying to level the playing field. And that's where a lot of this trade war is coming into play, these tariff wars. But the way I see it, it's going to be short-lived. We're going to figure out a way to negotiate ourselves out of this. But you can't have a trade dispute, or you have to have a trade dispute in order to get more equitable footing for both parties involved. Right now, the European, pretty much all of our trade partners have taken advantage of the U.S., and implementing these tariffs are a way of starting to rectify, getting people back to the negotiating table, and making a future that is hopefully more equitable for both parties involved. That's kind of the way I see it. Unfortunately, I also think that's going to lead to short-term pain for the U.S. markets. But I think it's pain that needs to happen, especially if we're going to try getting over the huge economic turmoil that the Biden administration left us in. Canada and Mexico, Trump's 25% across the board tariffs on its U.S. neighbors went into effect on Tuesday, March 4th. Just 2 days later, Trump confirmed the U.S. would pause tariffs on goods and services compliant with the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement, the USMCA, until April 2nd. For its part, Canada retaliated Wednesday to the steel and aluminum tariffs with new duties on about $20 billion of U.S. gold or U.S. goods, but that also went backwards. I don't know why they didn't include that. China, Trump has enacted new blanket tariffs around 20% on top of the existing 10% duties that went into place during Trump's first term. China has responded with up to 15% duties on U.S. farm goods such as chicken and pork to start Monday, March 10th. That one is an interesting development that the Chinese government put in play. I'm surprised it was only 15%. Just looking at their economy and in the trade war, I am actually just surprised it's only 15%. I figured it was going to be a lot higher than that. But, whatever. Trump has also signed a measure that could lead to an implementation of a reciprocal tariffs on U.S. trading partners as soon as April 2nd, aiming to fulfill a frequent campaign promise and raise revenue as Republicans ready a tax and spending bill. So, big retailers are trying to work out the deals in China to avoid raising prices for consumers as tariffs take hold, as large retailers brace for the impact of President Donald Trump's trade war. Particularly, I don't like this, how they're phrasing it as a trade war. Yes, technically it's a trade war, but this just gives it a negative connotation where this trade war is not necessarily negative as of yet. It might change. And trade wars are not necessarily a bad thing either, especially if the parties are not on equitable footing. But, that is what it is. Particularly as it relates to China, some have started to ask suppliers in China to shoulder some of the cost increases. The Wall Street Journal reports Walmart, Home Depot, and other retailers say they're attempting to avoid passing increased costs to the consumers as price hikes. William Liu, sales director for Rongli Garments, a Chinese manufacturer that makes seamless apparel, said that when the 10% tariff hit in February, his company agreed to lower prices by 5% for Walmart, though it cut into the garments maker's profit margins, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's actually, it sucks for them, but it also benefited Walmart because they got a better deal. However, it's complicated, right? After Trump imposed an additional 10% tariff, Walmart asked the company to raise the discount to 10%. Liu's company couldn't afford to absorb the cost, and as a result, Walmart is seeking new suppliers outside China. That, in and of itself, actually accomplishes one of the purposes of a trade, which is sourcing new suppliers, right? That is something, right? So China has taken advantage of the U.S. China is probably the number one enemy of the U.S. in an economic sense. So Trump is in fact accomplishing a positive here, which is damaging China in the trade war, and is going to put them in a weaker position, which potentially is going to allow them to come back to the table, make some agreements outside of the economics, such in the political realm, because you got to remember, this is not happening in a vacuum. There are many things that China are doing that threaten the United States. Biggest one I can think of right now is the rare earth minerals. China, I guess it's also why internet access, telecommunications. There's actually quite a bit of things that that China is threatening the U.S. for or on. Biggest one though really is the rare earth minerals. They have leases and have bought land in all over the world that the U.S. used to have relatively good control over. Now China is actually doing it, so they're putting themselves in a position where they could potentially become more dominant than the U.S. So yes, this trade war is going to hopefully alleviate some of that stress as well. Target 2 is talking to suppliers about how to share additional costs, and Rick Gomez, chief commercial officer for the company right now, a lot of those negotiations are going on. Some of the haggling has promoted more sourcing from outside of China. After the first 10% tariff on Chinese goods in February, Home Depot asked one of its U.S. suppliers of lighting and home decor to absorb the cost, according to an executive at the supplier. The supplier agreed to a 2-month 10% discount, part of which would be covered by its Chinese manufacturer. And the Chinese government isn't thrilled about some of the retailers' tactics, and many of the suppliers have margins already stretched to their limits. Added the uncertainty of which tariffs will stick and which one Trump's might suspend or multiply, it's becoming harder for big retailers to predict which products might become more expensive over the long term. And this kind of opens up another avenue, which is the big retailers have in fact destroyed small businesses in America. You can actually go around and look at a lot of the towns, and you'll see a lot of empty, abandoned buildings because they no longer could compete with the prices that they were that the people would be able to pay at the large retailers that were getting their products from overseas, right? So, like I said, this is not happening in a bubble. These are all interconnected. They're all intertwined. The previous article we read, we were actually talking about fentanyl and the illegal immigration that's going on. That is another benefit that tariffs can do, is it opens up avenues for conversation in order to help stem those issues. Going back on illegal immigration, yes, illegal immigration is bad because they're breaking our laws. I'm not going to try fighting or denying that. Where we suck as Americans is the fact that our political class is absolutely non-willing to work on the issues that really affect us. And one of the biggest things that affect us is our immigration laws. Our immigration laws are so antiquated that it's easier, and because these people want political bread and butter or something to argue about. Illegal immigration comes up every election, right? Absolutely ridiculous. Why don't we just go ahead and start fixing our problem, right? We all recognize that America was built on immigrants. We all recognize that immigrants are a net benefit for our society. Where the people that, well, I'm not going to speak in a blanket term because I do know there are some that don't really care. They think that they are better and whatnot. But for the most part, having immigrants coming into the country to pursue a life that they want, a better, more economically positive life that they want, is not a bad thing. And America actually needs that. We need those people to come in because America does not have the birth rate to replenish itself, just like most European countries don't have that birth rate anymore. Western society, feminism really has destroyed the family ideal that humans have. So there's more. Like I said, this is not in a bubble. These tariffs are affecting a lot of other things, and we'll see how it has to go. I'm hoping that the Republicans, which I doubt they will, but I'm hoping the Republicans will put forth better laws on our immigration practices to allow people in, to quit trying to limit everything, limit people coming in, and to help stem the tide of illegal immigrants coming into the United States. Because if our system was more streamlined, if our system was more friendly to people, then we wouldn't have to deal with as large of a illegal immigration crisis that we've been dealing with. But a lot to go into this stuff. So the France PM said planned EU tariff on Kentucky bourbon was one of the trade war's missteps. Yeah, that's a big one there, guys. But, whatever. The first round of European Union's counter tariffs against the U.S. goods slated to begin April 1st, but President Donald Trump's threat to impose a 200% tariff on EU alcohol, still just threat at this point, continues to dominate the tariff conversation. On Sunday, the Associated Press reported French Prime Minister Francis Bayrou was calling for further talks to stave off an additional tariffs, which would devastate France's cognac industry. He said that the EU was probably mistaken when it targeted American bourbon in its tariff plans. Have some missteps been made? Yes. Probably because Kentucky bourbon has been included, as if it were a trade threat. He said of the EU's proposed tariffs in response to the U.S. duties on steel and aluminum. A very old product list has been retrieved without being checked like it should have been, he told France Interradio. Trump's threat against the EU wine and spirits has caused dismay among European producers who rely on export, including French cognac makers already hit with tariffs by Beijing in a separate row over EU duties on Chinese electric cars. Right? You can see how this all starts going and like spreading out across the world. Right now, it's majorly in the news in the U.S. because Trump is doing something that most presidents don't do. Most people don't view tariffs as being a net positive. I will say I am not displeased with tariffs and Trump's utilization of tariffs. I am questioning whether or not he's going a little too forceful. But I can also see how going past where you want to be is actually going to be a negotiation tactic in order to get more equitable terms. Yeah, it's hard. It's whatever. So here, let's look at NPR. Oh, God. I'm not a fan of NPR. NPR is supposed to be non-biased, but it is one of the most liberal biased publications I have ever found. As global tariffs tensions rise, here's the latest on U.S. trade with top partners. In less than 2 weeks, President Trump has upended global markets by imposing tariffs on imports from several of America's top trading partners. He has not upended the global markets. He has shaken them, but he has not upended them. But again, NPR, very liberal-based publication, trades on censorious headlines and mistruths. But that it is what it is. They fearmonger. With the initial shock still settling in, countries are taking different approaches in response while also struggling to keep up with Trump's unpredictable on-again, off-again trade policies. It almost seems like they're trying to say that that's a bad thing, that Trump is being unpredictable. But that actually, if you're in a negotiation stance and you're trying to work out a more effective deal that's more equitable for both parties, being unpredictable is not a bad position to be in. Whatever. The EU and Canada moved quickly this week, announcing billions of dollars in retaliatory tariffs. Others, like the UK, Mexico, and China, are taking a more cautious approach, which is interesting. When you take a more cautious approach with Trump, you're showing respect to Trump, and you're not having as many issues popping up like the EU and Canada are having pop up. That's not saying that Trump is by far better than that. It just means that if you want to avoid an all-out trade war, being more cautious to what Trump's doing and trying to come to the table is actually probably going to be your better bet than just being like, oh, you're doing this, I'm going to do this, and retaliate. That doesn't work. I don't know. Meanwhile, markets are in free fall. No, they're not. And economists are raising alarms about inflation and possible U.S. recession. Only the economists, the ones that lean left-wing, most right-wing economists are not raising alarms about this. And that's mainly because the left likes to work with fear. They like to spread fear. I am looking at all of what's going on, and I'm actually more optimistic about what's going on in the economy than I am looking at it being. Inflation has already started to drop. We've already seen that happen. And with that happening, it's removing a possibility of going into recession. Now, could this be true? Sure, it could be true if you are looking at trade wars and ramping up as a continuous thing, which I don't believe we're going to do, mainly because just take a look at Trump's thing, 25% on steel and aluminum coming out of Canada. Canada went ahead and tried doing something. Trump said, okay, I'll increase yours to 50. They backed down. what does that actually say? It says that people are not willing to get into a large-scale trade war, which means that recession is probably not on the table. But, again, left-wing media outlet is going to be fear-mongering. The EU announced $28 billion in retaliatory measures on Wednesday, including levies on Kentucky bourbon, jeans, and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU is acting to protect consumers and businesses after the Trump administration moved to place a 25% tariff on imports of steel and aluminum. I don't disagree with their wanting to be retaliatory, but what they're failing to do is take a targeted approach. There's a specific reason why Trump is going after steel and aluminum as a tariff. Going after Harley Davidson's, jeans, and bourbon, it just seems like you're throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Whereas if you took the time and actually said, okay, you know what, these things are actually going to hurt our country, I'm just going to leave it there. Well, she defended the EU countermeasures as strong but proportionate. I would disagree. And she said, we'll always remain open to negotiation. That's good. The EU's retaliatory measures are scheduled to take effect in April and will be introduced in 2 stages starting April 1st. The 27-nation bloc will impose $4.9 billion worth of tariffs that date back to Trump's first term. On April 13th, an additional round of new tariffs will be placed on over $19 billion worth of U.S. goods, subject to approval of EU member states. They would include levies on agricultural products, industrial machinery, and household appliances. Some tariffs in this round would specifically target products produced by Republican states. That's the other thing, is they are specifically going after people that they view as others, the Republicans, which you can do in a tariff war or in a trade war. I mean, you can do this to target, but the reason they're doing it is specifically because they're wanting to erode Trump's support from his base, which makes sense. Again, it makes sense. It's not a bad thing that they're doing that. I mean, that it's not in a vacuum. Just because Trump is making these moves doesn't mean that these other people, that his moves are the best and that everyone else in retaliation should just be like, oh, we're going to roll over and bend to Trump. No, that's not what I'm saying in any way, shape, or form. Trump's making some good moves. Again, I say he's making a little more aggressive moves than I would have anticipated. But the simple fact that they're going to be able to, like she said, will always remain open and negotiate is good. And then them using tariffs to target his political base, also completely understandable and acceptable. I'm not going to sit there and say that they're wrong for doing any of that. I've heard that argument that the EU going after Republicans is actually very underhanded and stuff. And I'm like, it's not underhanded. It is literally a tool that a tariff allows you to have. So yeah. And then here's a list of just this is from UPS, which is interesting. I found it on UPS. These are the tariff developments, updates on news of steel and aluminum, right? There's a 25% steel and aluminum imports that it was effective on March 12th of 2025. And then if you want, you can go to it and find out, the key specifics. Let's see. Additional, where'd it go? Effective March 7th, commodities covered on the USMCA agreement are exempt from the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexican origin goods that took effect on March 4th, right? So, I mean, you can just come over here and you can look around. You can actually go and kind of follow what's going on with the tariffs that the U.S. is implementing and some of the specific details that are going to be affected by those tariffs. And then don't just look at what the U.S. tariffs are doing. Look at what the responses are to those U.S. tariffs, and then actually go ahead and look at other tariffs that are not in response to it, that are already in place. Like I said, tariffs are not necessarily a bad thing. They can end up creating bad situations. they can also end up being good and creating good situations. So they're neither good nor bad. It all comes down to how you wield them. Do I think Trump's wielding them accurately or appropriately? Like I said, I have my slight disagreements with how he's doing it. However, the mechanisms behind what he's accomplishing with them is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just wondering if he's going a little too hard and alienating himself. Granted, at this point, he can't really alienate himself any more than he already is. I mean, he is viewed as this horrible person, which is interesting because Donald Trump is a 90s Democrat, plain and simple. He is not even very conservative. He ran under the Republican Party, and because he ran under the Republican Party and he's not agreeing with the progressive left, he has just been ostracized and demonized. Is he a good person? I don't think he's a good person. Is he a good president? His first term was a pretty good first term. So far, I am not. There's only one major aspect of his administration currently that I'm upset with, and that is the way and who he's targeting with his ICE and the illegal immigration and the deportation. I'm not in agreement with how ICE is handling all of that. That's more or less because I'm of a mind that having immigrants is a good thing, and treating everyone as a criminal that crossed illegally, while lawfully correct, excludes the morality and compassion aspect that the American people should have. If you are a criminal that is selling drugs or in a gang, or you're in prison or whatnot, sure, that makes sense. Let's get all those people out. But if you're a mother of 3 children and ICE is coming into your house to deport you and separating you from your family, I think that those people should be put in a separate list, and we need to figure out some way, shape, or form to say, hey, you know what, you've been a net benefit to our country. You're doing things the way that we're wanting things to be done. You're not trying to whatever, and get them a pathway to citizenship. I'm somewhere in between the two, and that's more or less because I believe that our immigration laws are so antiquated that we, as the American people, have allowed our government officials to create these situations that are not morally beneficial to anyone, and it's just creating a bunch of issues. Nonetheless, I wanted to talk tariffs. We read through what tariffs are. We've talked whether or not they're good or bad. You got my opinions on these things. You now know some of the moves Trump's are making, some of the responses some of the responses from what the moves that Trump is making, whether or not Trump's moves are good or bad, and then what the effects are. Are we going to see inflation? I don't think so. Are we going to see a recession? If I'm not seeing inflation, I don't see how we're going to get to a recession. Could this mean that we start seeing more manufacturing bases pop back in? We're already starting to see it. Was it Ford? I think it was Ford moved most of its manufacturing back to the States rather than in Mexico. So that's a net benefit for the U.S. Like I said the other week, these things are not, the illegal immigration, the economy, the tariffs, all of this, the DIE, the Doge. These are not individual. These are all touching bases, trying to pulling tools out of each one of these in order to make a stronger America. Because the Biden administration and the Democrats have eroded the American dream for most people. It is, to me, I find it absolutely ghastly that the Democrats, under the guise of helping people, have destroyed the future for Gen Z, Gen Alpha. They have limited, even millennials are struggling in order buying houses and stuff like that. But it's the generations after that are really struggling. And it's all due to Democrat policies. It's all due to what they're trying to do. I've said it before. You need both parties working together in order to move forward. You have to have the innovation, the progress that the Democrats represent, but you also have to have the traditionality and conserve what has been working. Throwing out what has been working in order to just get progressive ideas is not healthy. We are seeing that firsthand. Since the 60s, the United States have been on a decline. I shouldn't say the 60s. It's actually probably closer to the 80s. Because the 60s, we actually started seeing a lot of equality rising up. And then as those started coming into play, as people were being more accepting and whatnot, we started seeing pushing further and further, which actually started eroding the foundations of what America is, and we are now seeing it firsthand where the American dream is not possible for most Americans anymore. It's unfortunate. The Democrats are now the party of the elite, which is interesting that they want to sit there and say that they're for the middle class and whatnot. They are not. The Democrats are now the party of the elite. They are West Coast elitists who look down on everyone else and think that they have to help everyone else. Whereas the Republicans are now more, and I say Republicans because I shouldn't actually say Republicans, because I should say the right, because the right now is everyone that is non-Democrat. You have independents, you have libertarians, you have Republicans, you have constitutionalists, you have a lot of other people that don't agree with the Democrats, the progressive left, that have been othered, ostracized, expanding the right wing out so far that all good ideas are almost exclusively stuck on the right now. I also find it really interesting that most Democrats say that the Republicans have shifted far right, which not anywhere close to the truth. The Democrats have shifted so far left that they think everyone else shifted right. It's absolutely bonkers. But it does actually correlate to their worldview. Their worldview is their reality is the only reality that matters. When they talk about democracy, they're talking about their democracy. They're not talking about everyone else's republic. They're talking about what they can control and they want to be in power. The left is now the party of the elites. They think they are better. And they look down. They treat everyone else as others. It's unfortunate because, most people don't agree with it. But till next time, hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Till next time, peace.